and then I'll do the. Hi everyone, welcome to another Ask the Professionals with OZeWAI. OZeWAI is OZeWAI.org. We're a not-for-profit for digital accessibility professionals. We've been running these for over a year, and we've had some wonderful conversations with people on different types of digital accessibility topics. Today we're looking at tips and tricks for small businesses and not-for-profit organizations, but I think this could benefit anyone that is trying to deal with the everyday accessibility challenges that we have, whether it's your content, your comms, those kinds of things. Please check out OZeWAI's website, join if you can, subscribe to our newsletter. We had one that went out earlier this week, that's on our website as well. And feel free to go back to our other Ask the Professional events and have a look at the sessions on our YouTube channel. I'm going to introduce Amanda, my co-chair from OZeWAI, who is going to moderate the panel today, and she'll introduce our panelists. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Sorry, I forgot to do the acknowledgement.
Oh, yes.
So I would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm meeting today here in Canberra, and pay respects to the elders of the Ngunnawal Nation, both past and present. And I extend this respect to Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander peoples in attendance today. And I welcome you to please, in the chat, feel free to put your name, your role, and who you pay your respects to today, if you do so in Australia or overseas. And also, as we go through the session, please put your questions in the chat. And we do usually have time at the end as well for some other questions. But yeah, please, that will help us keep going. I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions today. So thanks, everyone. Over to you, Amanda, for real this time.
Thanks, Bree. Hi, everyone. Good morning from, well, sort of shiny Perth. So my name is Amanda Mace. I am co-chair of OZeWAI alongside Bree and vice president of GrackleDocs, a digital accessibility firm. So I'm going to explain a little bit about how we're going to go through today, and then I'm going to get our fantastic guests to do a bit of an introduction to themselves and their businesses, and why they're here today. So today's going to run a little bit like all the previous ones have run, at least certainly when I've been moderator, is I'm going to field some questions to each of our fabulous guests. I'll direct them individually. Sometimes I'll have you answer the same question, sometimes different questions, just based on answers. Oftentimes, we don't get through all of the questions, and that's just because we have such a great conversation. It goes in all sorts of directions. So if we don't get to a question that's in the chat or even on our working doc that we're using to work through questions, that's okay. We can always send emails later with some follow-ups if they're really urgent. And I'm sure that our panelists would love to have you contact them if you have a specific question for them. So that's enough about me and about how we're going to run today. We will try and take it, if we need a break about halfway through, we'll take that break. But if not, we'll probably just try to go through and answer as many things as we can and have as great a conversation as we can. So Francis, I'm going to start with you in terms of introduction and really just who you are, your role, and of course the company that you're representing today.
Wonderful. Thanks, Amanda. Hi, everybody. Lovely to be here. I'm the Access and Inclusion Consultancy Manager at GetAboutAble. Our team builds the capacity of tourism operators, government bodies, businesses and community organisations to assist them to be more accessible and welcoming through a range of tailored consultancy services, including access inclusion reviews, access guides and disability action inclusion plan development, staff training and digital accessibility content. We also deliver and organise the Accessible and Inclusive Tourism Conference that's happening on the 27th of August in Melbourne if you're interested in attending. To me, it is critical to enable improved access and inclusion for people with disability in all their diversity and intersecting identities, to have equity of opportunity to participate fully in all aspects of life and make contributions that are valued to our communities, both as customers and employees.
Amazing. Thank you, Francis. I'm personally going to be in Melbourne. I leave on Friday next week for the conference, and I'm super excited to once again, this is my second year in a row going, so I'm really excited about that. David, how about you? You're next on my screen, so Liz, we'll save you for last but not least, I promise. David, can you do a bit of an intro again? who you are, your role, and the organization you're representing today and what you do.
Sure. Thanks, Amanda. Thanks for having me. I'm joining from Melbourne, from Naarm, from the beautiful and unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people. It is a bit grey outside today, but these are still beautiful lands. So yeah, my day job, my role is the CEO of InfoXchange, and InfoXchange is a not-for-profit social enterprise. We've been going for over 30 years now on this vision of technology for social justice. Kind of what does that mean? Kind of two core social objectives that drive what we do. One is around digital empowerment, so strengthening communities and enabling people through the use of technology. And the second is around building the capability of the not-for-profit sector to have more impact in their work through the use of technology. So you can kind of see where accessibility obviously plays right across all of that. A couple of other hats. I'm also chair of the Australian Digital Inclusion Alliance, which is looking to kind of advance digital inclusion across Australia. Accessibility is also obviously a core element of that. And I'm also a board member of an organisation called Specialist Turn, which works to create neurodiverse workplaces and help create career opportunities for people on the autism spectrum. So that's a bit about me professionally. Personally, I'm also a father of two neurodiverse kids. I've got an autistic son and I've got a daughter with ADHD. And I think that's probably my observation in recent years is we've started to think much more broadly about inclusion and accessibility, and so including neurodiverse, including people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, and that's what drives me professionally and personally. But great to be here today. Thank you.
I love that. Thank you for sharing, David. I love that you included your family life in that. I actually have one of my sons home today. It's a student-free day, so if I get interrupted while talking, I apologize in advance. He will likely be asking for food. I will likely tell him if he's hungry, he can have an apple, and he will argue that he's not that hungry, but he would rather a bag of chips. So apologies if I get this very frustrated look on my face. It's probably because I'm dealing with him. Liz, like I said, last but not least, most definitely, please, an introduction to you, your role, and your organization.
Thanks so much, Amanda, and thanks everyone who's joined the call today. It's so lovely to be here. My name is Liz, and I'm joining from Kogarah, the lands of the Bidigal people. And yeah, it's quite a drab day outside, so it's nice to be cozy and joining the call. So I recently co-founded the company called Content Design Hub. We are a marketplace that gives people the tools and resources to create inclusive products that speak our customers' language. So we really focus on creating inclusive language, accessible content, and building up capability for individuals and organizations as well. So we have training and coaching services for individuals who want to upskill into content design. And we also provide team and workforce training as well to help people create accessible content too. And also, that's a bit of my side hustle, and I am also the content design lead at Service New South Wales, the Australian agency as well. And I mature the content design team within Service New South Wales, and I also sit within the design system team as well. So creating content governance frameworks and style guides to ensure that we're creating consistent content experiences across all of our digital products and services. So yeah, that's a little bit about my professional life. Personal life, I have a fur baby, a chocolate Labrador. She's probably sitting right outside my door, sulking because I'm not giving her attention. And yeah, I recently moved to Kogarah as well. So just it's really great to explore a new area. So that's me.
Well, OZeWAI loves having pets on screen, so feel free. We will lavish all of the love on your chocolate Labrador.
It will take over the entire screen. She's bigger than I am.
It's happened before. It wouldn't be the first time. Look, Liz, I'm actually going to start with you, and I think in terms of we've got so many great questions, and I'm looking forward. Please audience members, as you're listening and something pops in mind, pop your question into the chat, and Bree will make sure I see it at some point. But Liz, when we're talking, so today's session is all about small businesses, medium-sized businesses, not-for-profits. What are the kinds of ways, from a content point of view, when you think accessibility, that you immediately go, small businesses can do this, it's really achievable?
Yeah, for sure. So the beauty of the internet is that there are so many free and open resources to embed content strategy and content design techniques and frameworks into your organization without having to reinvent the wheel. So even at Service New South Wales, we also rely on the research of industry best practice and other large organizations as well, and inject that into our own strategy. And so it doesn't matter if you have a business, with 2 to 3 employees and you've just started, or you have a large established organization with over thousands of employees and multiple digital products, you can still benefit from the exact same resources. And what we're looking at are things like open style guides. So the Australian Government Style Manual is an amazing resource, and I literally review it every single day. And we use that not just within government, but it's also a really great resource for any type of small business to use as well. Even if you have a brick and mortar store, you've got a cafe, but you've got a website. Well, that website, it's really important for that website and that digital experience to be accessible. So it then ties into your physical experience as well. It's a full service offering. So sometimes, people see digital products and it's like, how can I personally make that accessible and inclusive when you have no coding background or you're not an accessibility expert? And it's looking at what you can focus on, and content is a really great thing that people can focus on as well. And when we look at accessibility, the industry best practice is looking at WCAG guidance. And so that's Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And that is a requirement for all businesses to follow as well. And a core part of that is content. It's literally in the name. And so I think sometimes people forget how important content is to accessibility. It's really important to write clear, simple content in plain English that speaks the language of your customers so everyone can understand. I think sometimes the issue is people see, when we simplify content, they're like, no, you're dumbing down our words. Now we don't sound as smart and, professional. But really, we're opening up our language so more people can understand what we're providing, and we can connect with more people as well. So I would say with small, to large businesses, have a look at those online resources. Don't reinvent the wheel. Take what you can from style guides that are open. There's a few others I can list out. I'll pop them in the chat just so, because you might not remember after I talk as well. But yeah, there's great online resources, Atlassian Design System as well, Canva Design System, and they're things that they're tried, they're tested, they're used by large organizations, so you can also adopt them as well.
Oh, thank you for that. I was gonna ask another question, but I'll ask that later. I want to stay on this topic really quickly. With that many resources, and David, I'm going to ask you this, and I'm really interested when we're looking at a broader view. There are so many resources out there, and you would hope for consistency. We don't always actually get consistency across resources. So when you're dealing in that situation, what's the advice for small businesses? Because hiring a consultant to kind of give you this is what you should do and what you shouldn't do can be really expensive. So how do you sift through the free resources and find the right one?
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of speaking from the not-for-profit side as well. And I guess the way we look at it, and absolutely Liz is right, there is so many resources out there. Don't reinvent the wheel. But it's also very much the people-based angle to this. And so that's what we look at in the not-for-profit sector, which has a natural affinity to, creating things in an inclusive way, in actually engaging the community, and doing this as a kind of natural way of working and a values-based for a not-for-profit organisation. But interestingly, sometimes when not-for-profits get to a digital technology project, they leave all of that at the door and go, oh no, we better leave this to the tech experts. And for some reason, kind of look past a lot of those natural advantages. So I guess I'd make that comment, whether it's not-for-profits or small businesses, is just be talking to people with lived experience. And that doesn't necessarily have to cost a large amount of money with a massive consultancy exercise. That can be working with, your own staff with a disability. That can be working with your customers or your clients that have a disability. And so that's kind of the side that I really encourage, is to say, actually speak to people who are going to be using your products and services, and bring that into the work. And absolutely the importance of the WCAG guidelines from a technical perspective, and then the content. And again, having that content, informed by people with lived experience, who can really help you craft that content. Not just thinking about things like easy English, which again are incredibly important, but what is the sort of content that's relevant and is going to speak to those community members. So that's what I would say. And if you're kind of looking for where to get started across that myriad of content, obviously the OZeWAI website is a fantastic place to start, because you've curated all of those resources. You've said, here's where to start. Here's some great work by government to build on that, and here's how to keep going. So I would, if you're looking for resources online, I'd absolutely start there.
See, Bree, I didn't even have to plug it. David did it for us. Francis, I want to pick up on that human-centered, people-centric element that David's talking about, because it's a really important one. And GetAboutAble, certainly that's a big part of what you do in terms of your reviews and just the advocacy work of GetAboutAble in general. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on being people-centric. Why are people not people-centric?
I think, Amanda, I think generally in my experience, there is a fear of engaging with people with disability. Essentially, I find that we find this all the time, particularly through our trainings, that we're really encouraging people to get started, make a start. And that starts with awareness raising. And it does come across that people haven't had exposure to people with disability. They're a bit frightened they're going to end up on a DDA complaint, and they're going to say the wrong thing. What I would say from GetAboutable's perspective is that it is really important. I totally agree with what David has said. We are a small social enterprise ourselves that are seeking to grow our consultancy ourselves. We know that we need to grow in order to increase the impact, the social impact that we've always been focused on. And we too, everyone on team has a lived experience of disability. They either have a disability themselves or they have loved ones that do. So my son is neurodiverse and I have 2 siblings who have a disability. And when we talk about looking at that user experience, really important that people are aware that it's so much more than a particular segment of the disability community. You need to really open up that awareness of the diversity and the intersectionality of the disability community. So, and our team reflects that diversity. So, there's a whole range of accessibility needs out there based on people's disability, but also broader than disability. People who are aged have accessible requirements. So, in the disability community, whether it's neurodiversity or vision or hearing or mobility or hidden disabilities, which are 90% of the disability community. And in fact, we've learnt from the Hidden Sunflowers program that there's over 900 hidden disabilities. So the diversity is quite broad, and having that information front and centre is so important as we're talking about that content. It needs to be in a range of formats, but also people need the opportunity to plan before they participate in any offerings. And so that information needs to be front and centre in a dedicated accessibility page for them to make informed decisions and plan their participation.
That's a really good point, sort of planning for participation. I think that fear that David spoke about is very real with clients that I speak to. They don't want to offend. They also don't want to get sued. And they don't really know where to start when it comes to working with people with disabilities or any sort of lived experience. They're almost scared to make the wrong move instead of making a move. David, generally, what's your advice to people who come to you and go, I don't know what to do there. How do you point them in the right direction and not scare them off?
Yeah, I mean, building on what Francis just said, I think it is just encouraging that conversation. So not to be scared to engage, and putting it out there. I mean, just kind of exposing some of that vulnerability yourself to say, well, this is the first time we've tried this. We're trying to do better. We're looking for some help. And just putting some of that vulnerability out there, I think is really important. The other is then just helping organizations think through how they best do that. And so, a lot of organizations, even internally, don't necessarily know, who they could draw on from within their own base of staff and volunteers. And you've got to be careful with that as well, because they may not necessarily want to dive in and help, but generally in our experience that they do. And so, same in our workforce is we have a large number of people with a disability and neurodiverse conditions and others. So how do you bring that out? That's what we encourage people to think in their own organizations. Then kind of from our perspective, we also have a community advisory group. We used to have what we called a disability reference group, and we've kind of moved away from that. Because we think it's far more powerful to have a much broader community advisory group, which for us includes, people with lived experience of homelessness and family violence and mental health, for example, as well as people with, various forms of disability, including neurodiversity and people from different backgrounds. So some of it, I think, is just talking about how you do this to kind of remove some of that factor. And then if they are wanting help, then kind of pointing them to consultants and others that can help them work through a process. Again, that may cost some money. It doesn't always cost as much as people think. So just engaging somebody to help you kind of set up those processes within the organization, I think is incredibly important. But yeah, not to be fearful. And then when you go into those conversations, be willing to listen. And we've worked with some amazing disability advocates over time, and they will often tell you very directly what they think and what they think it is you are doing wrong. Try not to take offense to that, and try not to get overwhelmed by that. That is just amazing feedback that they're very generously giving your organization. So yeah, that's sort of
an opportunity. That's the way to view it. That's often
absolutely
clients. This is an opportunity. Liz, I'm going to go back to you because we've already mentioned WCAG, which obviously Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. WCAG has WCAG to ICT, how you apply that to other ICT. But aside from WCAG, what kind of frameworks do you think? So if you're not yet at the space where you're in sort of that research user testing sort of mode, from a content point of view, we know in development, there's often personas that people will build. We encourage very much that people use people with lived experience and disability to help make some of those personas more realistic to what the population actually is, and reflect that. But what kind of frameworks do you use within your own business to try and, outside of WCAG, to try and build content really accessibly?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And yeah, again, my company is quite small. So, I don't have all the resources and the budget to go and do extensive research. And so it's understanding with your budget, with your needs, what can you do at each time, as you're scaling and growing. And there's one of the first things is building up a style guide and being really intentional with what is your mission, what are your values, does accessibility or inclusivity form part of those values as well? Because then everything can cascade down from that as well. And one of the big things that you can add into your style guide is around readability metrics and readability levels as well. So the important thing here is to write content that is familiar to a wide range of audiences and also needs as well. So what we already know about how people read is that people skim content and they're looking for keywords. They're also looking for patterns. They're looking for common terminology that they know. And user behavior, it changes over time and with technology. And so the key thing is to be consistent and continually get feedback from your users and talk to your users, conduct desktop research to stay on top of the same words and language that people are using. And in terms of readability as well, it's really important to write for people with at a year 7 grade level as well. So between 12 to 14 years old is what we're trying to aim for when we write content. And by doing that, you automatically meet the AAA level compliance on WCAG. And you haven't really done a thing, right? You've just put in, okay, this is the level that we're going to write for, and now we're going to implement it with the digital content that we create. Now, you might be thinking, what the hell is it, between a year 12 and 14 level of content? And, we hear the Harry Potter books thrown out a lot, right? And it's like, why was Harry Potter so widely adopted across so many different age groups? Because it used plain and simple language. And so it was really easy for people to understand and read no matter their ability or their age level, right? And that's the key there. If you want more people to consume and engage with your products, then make it easy for them to by writing for that reading level. And another thing you can do to ensure that you're reaching that reading level, what we say is what gets measured gets done. If you're not measuring anything, then how do you know that you're hitting those right levels? So there are lots of readability tools out on the market. There's a range of costs. There are free tools as well. So Hemingway is a really great free resource where you can copy and paste your content into the Hemingway web editor, and it will give you readability metrics and scores as well. Then there are other readability tools like Grammarly, Pro Writing Aid, Readable, that give you a lot more metrics and also helpful tips onto, well, how do you make this more readable? So for instance, cutting down the amount of content you have within how many words you have within a sentence. So write 20 words per sentence and, use simple words over complex words. And those are things that you can easily do. And those are metrics you can add into your style guide. And so you can then put an objective lens on your content. Because I think the issue, a lot of people see content as, oh, it's so subjective. I could give a brief to multiple different people and they'll come back to me with a different piece of content every single time. Well, yes, that definitely can be the case. But if you have more structured guidelines and rules in there, then all of a sudden content becomes less subjective as well. And that's the role of a content designer to create those easily to use frameworks and guidelines to help people create content that's consistent and accessible across the board.
That's amazing. And it reminded me, Liz, I just saw a very well-known accessibility advocate in the US had something up on LinkedIn the other day reminding people that spell checker is an assistive technology. And it just a great reminder that those simple things actually make a massive difference. Frances, I want to ask you, particularly from a tourism point of view, I want to delve into the way we talk, that year 7 reading level, because if you can't tell from my accent, while I have been living in Australia for 16 years, I'm Canadian by birth. And when I came here, it actually took me a really long time to be able to speak Aussie and to understand Aussie in lots of ways. And we have all this very different terminology in Australia and how that affects people with English as a second language, let alone coming from another English-speaking country. I remember, in fact, I'll tell a little story, slightly embarrassing for me, but when my husband and I were still dating, this is absolutely a true story. And I was still in Canada and he was here. We were doing the long distance thing for a while. There was a particular instance where we were chatting. It was middle of the night for me and daytime for him. And he said something along the lines of, "Don't worry, honey, I'll give you a ring soon." To which I replied, "That's okay. I don't care about that sort of thing." And he said, "I meant I was going to call you." And that was the day I died a little. I did not sleep very well that night, as you can imagine. So the way that we talk in Australia can be done. Now, funny enough, I use that all of the time. I tell people all the time, I'm going to bring you soon. But back then in 2008, let me tell you, and that was quite an embarrassing moment for me. So, Francis, when we're looking at the tourism sector and we're talking about English and the way that we write content, we think about content, how does that look for people coming over to visit Australia?
Yes, Amanda, I guess one thing that I would add before I go into that is from Liz's information, it is really important to know that in Australia, there's actually a very low functional literacy rate. It's only 46%. So it is really important for anybody who's trying to communicate to just speak plainly. And some people find that really difficult. And particularly when you're speaking to another industry, whether that's tourism or otherwise. So I think if you really want people to engage in your offerings, to speak plainly is really important. We do find that when we're looking, because we will have content reviews of websites, we're often saying, people aren't going to visit as a tourist, particularly people with disability, if you don't have that information on your website and make it really easy to find. And then the language itself needs to be in that plain format, which people struggle with, whether English is their first language or not. So it is really important not to use, as you've even illustrated yourself, Amanda, about those in-country kind of particularities that only, Aussies are going to understand. It might be slang. It is really important to be able to speak that more broadly and to be able to communicate in a way that enables people to understand that more clearly and through that range of mediums. So, text and video with captions, but also to be able to have, that audio description of what's going on, but behind any images, having alt text, but not just a static description. It needs to be able to convey the story so that people who are blind and are using the alt text through the screen readers can actually engage what you're conveying in that image with a real story, so that it really, particularly in that tourism sector, people are planning a holiday and they're wanting to get all excited about that and be able to imagine and dream that holiday and then step into the planning stage without having that often fear and trepidation. If people's accessibility needs are not met, often that can have dire consequences for people with disabilities. So it is really critical to have that information easily and readily available in multiple mediums.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And it's really interesting. In the chat, Melissa's just put an experience that she's had with a website that was being too cute. And that was literally going to be my question to David. How tempting is it to be cute with language? Because I've seen this even in some big corporations, in some of the big sectors in Australia where they want to be cute and they use it as part of heading structure in their content. And it's tempting, isn't it, to try and stand out with cute language?
It is tempting, and it's a real balance. I mean, in the not-for-profit sector, I'd kind of say the other as well. Sometimes you get people coming from outside of the sector coming into marketing and comms roles, and they're like, oh, the way you're describing yourselves is just so drab. Can't we please lift it up a little bit? So sometimes there is a bit of an opportunity to make it maybe just a little bit more cute, not to the level that was being talked about there. But I think and certainly echo those comments on use of easy English. That the other piece that we find in the not-for-profit sector is just so many acronyms, and you just use them without thinking. And particularly our work where we sit at that intersection of the not-for-profit sector and the tech sector, both are sectors full of acronyms. And so, you know, people talk about things like an SHS, which is a specialist homelessness service. Well, why don't you actually just talk about a homelessness service rather than jumping into all these acronyms? So I think that's incredibly important. And I was just going to give an example of kind of where we've done some of that content work with the disability community. One of the platforms we offer at InfoXchange is a mobile website called Ask Izzy, and it's a platform that helps people connect in with services in their local community. And right now, heartbreakingly, with the cost of living crisis, it just has a lot of people coming in looking for where they can get free food, where they can get financial support, access to housing and mental health type services. But we did a big piece of work to improve Ask Izzy for people with a disability. And yes, there were kind of the technical elements of WCAG compliance and how could we make the site better from a technical perspective. But most of it was about content and actually listening to the needs of community, how they would look to go about finding services, what sort of services they might be interested in that we didn't have already, updating things like service descriptions in the content to include things like, you know, information on hearing loops, information for people with sensory challenges, you know, some of what should be obvious, things like some of the mobility access for organisations. And it actually caused us to create a whole new part of Ask Izzy, which was a disability advocacy finder. And that came kind of directly from that work. Was often people were having trouble finding appropriate advocacy services to help them. And so I guess that's that full extension. It actually started on a technical, moved into content, and then moved into a whole kind of service design experience. But certainly for all of our service descriptions, it is about getting the content right. And it is kind of making it, factual information, easy to understand. Then also sometimes though acknowledging that there is a level of additional information that is very useful for people who work in the sector and people who understand eligibility in those terms. And so sometimes it's those people that may be helping others. So it's a real balance. But coming back to your original point, sometimes we can kind of get just a little bit cuter in some of our dull and drab descriptions of what we do in the sector.
It's actually a really good point because I'm reminded, for those of you who know, there's a content expert in Queensland, Tom Davis, who I did a presentation with in Brisbane a few months ago. And I'm reminded of one of the stories that he told about a client he had, and the way that they were wording things wasn't aimed for the audience. Like, it was fine, technically correct, but it wasn't aimed at the audience. And it just reminded me very much of how his company came in and sort of went, you know, this isn't the language they're speaking in, and therefore you should probably speak in their language. Liz, actually, I should probably do an intro to Tom Davis for you. I think you two would get along really well from a content point of view. I want to switch a little bit and talk about different types of mediums in which we communicate. So it's one thing to have a website. Nearly everyone does. WCAG certainly applies to websites. And there are different types of mediums, though. And social media and the way we talk on social media, Liz, is a little bit different. It's got its own accessibility sort of hot tips, and I'm sure we can all share a few of those as experts. But what do you find, Liz, from an accessibility point of view for small businesses, not-for-profits, the way they're utilizing sort of that communication, that medium, and those platforms? And then how does accessibility fit in?
No, that's a really great question. And I think if you're a smaller business, you know, you're really time poor as well. So you might be trying to reach your audience across many different social media channels because you're trying to drive awareness and extend your reach, right? And what we see a lot of the times, people will use the same tone and voice, and they will use the same type of posts, and they'll just apply that across all different social media channels. And the thing is, we need to know our audience, they might be the same people, but they're acting and they're showing up differently on different social media platforms because each social media platform has its own purpose, right? So I say it like the same thing as I show up to work differently as I show up to, you know, meeting my friends for lunch, right? I don't talk like this. And we also talk about different things as well. And, I use a different part of my personality. And it's the same with, social media channels. Like for LinkedIn, I'm not going there to browse photos of, people sharing their food, or, people watching, short videos and clips. I'm not there for that. I'm there for my professional community and to share advice and engage in different schools of thought, right? And so we need to treat how we create our content strategy different across the social media channels. And where accessibility comes into that is knowing your audience and what their needs are in that channel, and then writing for that. And also, like, we've shared before in this panel, alt text is a really big thing. And a lot of the times it gets missed. And so, for instance, on LinkedIn, ensuring that when you add an image, that it has alt text behind it and it's meaningful alt text. So if someone can't see the image, then that alt text accurately describes what that image is. And what we've seen as well, unfortunately, some of the free social media scheduling tools don't allow you to add alt text. It's a missing feature. And so what we do, especially, for my business, Content Design Hub, we have a social media strategy, and we hyper focus on LinkedIn because that's where our customers are, right? And so if we are posting, text with an image, we make sure we do it natively on LinkedIn rather than through a social media scheduler, because sometimes they miss that, right? And then the other thing is just to be really intentional. Don't try to spread yourself too thin. Focus on one, grow that community there, and then try, elsewhere as well. And like we've said before, it's just so important to know who your users are, and that in what we said in disability as well, there is a spectrum. So just because say there's a customer cohort that you're reaching and they have cerebral palsy, right? They might have many different needs based on, the type of, cerebral palsy spectrum that they sit within. And so it's coming with curiosity, it's coming with no expectations, and it's really learning more about your audience and who you're targeting. And do you need to target a specific audience, or are you targeting more of a broad audience? And then how do you write for that? And the main thing, of course, is when you write, simply, then you write for everyone as well. So that's the other key there as well. And that's like a tip that anyone can do. And it's nice talking about the little cute spin on content. For sure, it's definitely a balance, and it's knowing when to kind of be, cute and funny, and then when to be more informative. So that's where your tone of voice fits in, and that tone of voice can be applied differently across social media channels. So we might be a little bit more playful on Instagram, but we might be a little bit more serious and informative on LinkedIn. So it really just depends on the channel that you're using. If I applied that serious formal tone that I have on LinkedIn to Instagram, it would not work. I would definitely not get any audience reach. So it's thinking about that as well.
Frances, I want to pick up a bit of that and ask you, particularly from that tourism sector, where you're really trying to help government agencies, the tourism sector as a whole, to make what is, come have a holiday, have fun. That often ends up being very visual. How do you help where the perceivability is to, lots of images of the beautiful poolside, the amazing theme parks on the Gold Coast? How do you portray that when it's not an image? How do you advise?
I think you can have images, and actually we, the old adage of you can't be what you can't say, we do encourage people to engage, and we can offer that service, a media shoot with people with disability, and not just use stock images. And of course, people need to be paid for their talent and their time. It's really important to have images other than, people who mobilise in a wheelchair are 8% of the disability community. and often they're the images that we see. So it needs to be more than people in wheelchairs and not just people with disability on their own. So with family and friends, because they travel with their family and friends like all of us do. So I think that's important messages. I think that I think there's some misnomers about people making assumptions what people with disability can do on a holiday, and they think about making those decisions on behalf of people with disability and thinking that that they can't do what it might be seen as adventure tourism or have an aspect of risk to it. I mean, you were at our conference last year, and Amanda, and one of our side events that people could participate in was indoor skydiving, and our founder and director, Dr. Yasmin Gray, participated in that. And Yasmin mobilises in a motorised chair and doesn't have the capacity to wait there. So, we've learnt in those conferences as well from experts that you may recall that people with disability are actually less risk averse in their tourism offerings interests than people without disability. So I think people get caught up in, I think what, David was speaking a bit about before about this unconscious bias in their mind. And I think that's why for me, it's so imperative to have those conversations, as David's talked about, in an open way. We run our training in a very conversational, participatory way, so that it really brings down the bar of people feeling frightened to ask questions, because that's where you're going to encourage people to lean into their unconscious bias, and we all have it. We're socialized into it. So we need to be aware of that. We need to challenge that. And that's where the lights come on for people and they get really excited about, I've never seen this before. I can see it now. And I can actually, even from a tourism operator, no longer miss out on the 20% for business. And also in workforce shortages, the 20% of workforce that they're missing out by being biased against employing people with disability.
It's a really good point you made around, particularly I was thinking about the representation in imagery and content. And I'm wondering, David, do you get pushback when you make suggestions like that? So funny enough, I've recently heard a colleague of mine make a suggestion around more representation in a paper that was actually about people with disabilities, believe it or not. It had zero representation, let alone stock images. Do you find pushback when you're making that advice?
I think that the representation seem important, but yeah, very much building on Francis's comment is not to use stock images, and you're wanting to present as inclusive as your organization is, but doing that in a genuine way. And I think that's the most important piece for any organization is not to pick a stock image or not overly curate an image. It's got to be genuine. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. It doesn't translate. And absolutely building on what Francis was saying there as well around just that unconscious bias and really around assumptions. So, and it's human nature, but we make so many assumptions. And this is often said in the autistic community that if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. Don't kind of suddenly make a whole lot of assumptions around what they might be interested in, what they might be good at. And that's, particularly important for us at Specialist Turn when looking at roles and employment roles for autistic people is often autistic people are fantastic, for example, at software testing. Don't assume that every autistic person is going to want to software testing or be fantastic at software testing. Others might be very interested and very keen, for example, to care for animals. There's a whole range of employment opportunities there, but don't make any assumptions at all. And I think that's probably our biggest challenge in all of this work is for all of us, and particularly those of us that might have worked in this space for a while, to pull back some of those assumptions and some of those unconscious bias that we naturally come in with. Just a quick comment as well on the use of imagery and sort of alt tags and people kind of avoiding imagery because they think it might not be accessible. It is also to kind of think about, you know, where imagery is extremely useful and beneficial. And so this isn't an InfoXchange piece. This is from Mace, who's one of the autism peak bodies who actually has their office next door to InfoXchange. But we're actually looking to copy what they've done in the nicest kind of form of flattery. They do a great thing when people come to their organization for interviews or just visiting their office. They map out so well what that experience is going to look like. And it's full of, yes, text descriptions, but images as well. So it's if you come to our office by tram, this is where you get off the tram. This is what the tram stop will look like. You then cross the road. These are the traffic lights from an accessibility perspective. You know, here is kind of how you're going to hear. This are the sounds it's going to make. This is how then you enter the office building. This is how you would enter our office. You would then speak to somebody at reception, and then you'll probably ask to go into this meeting room, and this is who you would be meeting with. And so kind of a lovely set of descriptions and instructions, but also the visual imagery there is an extremely important part of that as well. So just make that comment is not always thinking about avoiding the visual imagery. Yes, absolutely, you need the alt text and you need the alternatives for people who are vision impaired. But also it can be a great way to kind of build confidence for somebody entering a physical environment.
It's a really good point. Funny enough, one I made to a client yesterday is that it's not that you can't have images, it's that you should be thoughtful about those images. And there's actually plenty of people who rely on those images. And the client that I was speaking to was around an infographic. And I'm like, from a cognitive point of view, this is a much better experience than reading 3 paragraphs of text trying to describe all of the data that you're putting in this one infographic, which visually is actually fantastic. So it's really important to remember. And this is the same, I think, and it leads really well. Liz, the next question is absolutely for you. It leads really well into the next one is, how do you make plain language in a very specialized area? So it's not that you can't, it's how do you do that?
I love this question so much. And I would say a lot of the time, my role as a content designer is actually reducing the amount of content. I'm not creating content, I'm cutting it back because there's too much. And what we see is that every word that you add to a digital product or experience, you're increasing the user's cognitive load because you are requiring the user to read that word. Even if they're skimming, they've got still more content to skim through to get to what they need. So we always say that, is that word necessary? Is that word unique and convey meaning? And if not, remove it because it's not needed. And especially with when you're working with more technical content or audiences that you might assume have a higher literacy level, whether or not they do. And we still need to apply the same principles there as well. So I used to work at the University of New South Wales, and we worked on different faculty and school websites from, engineering to communications. And what we would do is we'd work with the subject matter experts, which were the lecturers, and they wanted to obviously create awareness about their courses and programs. And we'd have to talk to the subject matter experts, distill that technical knowledge, and then put it onto the website in a way that audiences could understand. And there was a really tricky point there because obviously, as a university, you want to sound really professional and intelligent. But again, you need to think about your audience. A lot of the audience were students who have just finished high school. They don't know quantum physics and they don't know all of this technical jargon. They're just starting their learning journey. And even if they do, now this is the thing to remember, right? Even if your audience does know all this technical knowledge and jargon, they still need to take the time to read it. So the more complexity you add to the content, the more time it is going to take that person to read and digest your information, even if they know that technical language. And so what we do as content designers is we value people's time. We know that time is of the essence. People have a lot of things that they're juggling day-to-day life. You know, if someone is applying for a service online, they could be preparing a meal, you know, while listening to the TV in the background. Or how many times are you watching Netflix and you're on your phone scrolling and, you know, messaging your friends? You could also be interacting with the digital service on your phone at the same time. So you're distracted. There's so much noise around us and on a web page. So it's removing that clutter and that noise on a web page to make it really easy to interact with and then complete the task at hand. So I would have this conversation with, you know, lecturers all the time. You know, we're not dumbing down your language. I promise you, we're making it easier for people to get what they need, engage, and then hopefully convert them, whether that be they're filling out a form or they're just learning information about what your course is, and then taking that next step. And so it's really important to have those conversations to work on what is that common goal between you and the subject matter expert. If it is to convert people into a course, then great, we both have the same goal. At this moment, we just have different ways of going about it. But how can we help to, you know, educate people on the importance of simple language? And it's about creating case studies and also showing that conversion as well. A lot of the times what we would do as well is A/B test the content. All right, here's the first content that we have. This is the current content on the website. Let's see how that is performing through Google Analytics, through also usability tests as well, asking users, you know, what their experience is, what are their sticking points. A really great content exercise is called a highlighter test, where you ask participants to physically highlight the words that don't make sense to them. And that is a really eye-opening exercise because especially if you're the subject matter expert, you've got all this technical knowledge, you're like, I assume everyone should know this. And when you see people are physically highlighting those words, you're like, oh, it's an aha moment. Okay, maybe I didn't know my audience as well as I thought I did. And we always tell people you are not your user. You are, you know, an employee that's working towards business objectives. You are no longer your user, even if you once were. So we have to take that step back, and that's really important. So sometimes you have those difficult, challenging discussions with your stakeholders, but it's important to have that common goal, build that relationship, and help your subject matter experts to put themselves in your user shoes.
It's such a good point. And I know there are a few, I see them, accessibility experts in the room. This is something that we fall into really easily. We get so used to talking about standards and success criteria. I can list all of them to you off the top of my head. And sometimes it's easy to forget that we're still educating, and not everyone knows already the topic that we know so well. So it's a great reminder, even in fact, maybe particularly for accessibility experts like myself in the room, because I have absolutely been guilty of that in the past. There are a couple of questions that are now starting to come through the chat, which is fantastic. And one of the ones, and Francis, I want to put this one to you. What's your thought on the difference between alt text and image descriptions?
Well, I think I'm just going to put it out there. I'm not a digital accessibility expert, you know, but essentially my understanding is that the alt text enables screen readers to read that description, and for people with vision impairment to be able to engage with what that image is portraying. But if you're putting an image at the base of if you're putting text at the base of an image, that's not going to be able to be read by the screen reader. So you're actually excluding the person from being able to engage in the content. So I think I know, you know, that there's a tendency to do that sort of thing when you're producing documents because people are trying to explain it. But I think you need to understand in terms of accessibility, one's not enablement to participate.
David, your thoughts on that?
I was just going to jump in because it came up with an example we were looking at recently, and like Francis, I'm certainly not a digital accessibility or a coding expert. But I think there is probably a role for both, is what I would say. And the example I'd give is we've had a lot of experiences recently of people with English as a second language, or people from culturally and linguistically diverse communities using generative AI tools to better understand information and content. Often it's government forms, but it can be, I'm not speaking on government, can be a whole range of different information that can be difficult to understand at times. And so they're putting this information into the generative AI tools, and it's helping them get a much clearer view of, here's a 3 or 4 bullet summary in fairly easy to understand English of what this is talking about. And I'm not sure that those Gen AI tools are picking up the alt text, I guess is my comment there. So actually having it described properly as well, I think is important. So I was just going to, my comment would be, I think both are important when kind of thinking about content.
So I'm going to hold off. I am a digital accessibility expert, but Liz, from your point of view, and I think social media plays a part in this, where image descriptions have become actually quite popular, but also in documents, we're finding, an image description underneath an image versus alternative text, or maybe as well as alternative text. What's your thought from a content point of view?
Yeah, so what I saw the other day, someone posted on LinkedIn saying that alt text is not extra work, it's missing work. And that's really important to remember as well. And I guess it's also just thinking about, people's experiences and what type of image is this? Is this image adding to the message? Or is it decorative? It's just a bit of visual fluff to, add some, fun and spice to your website or to your post. And that decorative image doesn't need to be communicated because it would add to the clutter, of people's experience as well. So it's kind of, and from a coding perspective, I'm also not a coder. I work close with our engineers, and it's, telling the engineers, hey, this is a decorative image. It doesn't need to be conveyed, but this is an informative image and it does need to be conveyed. And here is the alt text. Here is the message that we need to convey with it. And I would say that, between image descriptions and alt text, very much agree, with David as well, is that, if the image might not be read correctly, or there is more of a description that you want to add. And that's the other thing, where alt text needs to be concise and meaningful. And sometimes it might be really hard to describe an image in a short amount of words. So adding a supporting copy, we call it as well, around that image can help to convey that. So we get into that sticky point a lot with graphs as well, right? There is so much information to explain within a graph. How could we do that in alt text? So it's adding that content around that image as well to help describe it. So that's where I see, image descriptions then continue to add to that alt text.
Yeah, so it's not my episode, so I'm not going to go into it, but there's a place for both. And keeping in mind that alt text is available for assistive technology, when you put an image description, everyone can see it. So there is a place for it, but understanding the difference between the two is really important. But that's a really great question, and one that I think should come up again. Bree, I think we'll make a note of it when we talk to a panel of digital accessibility experts. I think that's a great one to ask, because it does end up a lot in social media, but also in documents as well, not so much in websites. There's one here, and Liz, it really is particular kind of for you, I think. So someone had, and apologies, I don't remember who it was, but they said, I'm building a website for a painter. I'm in the research of how to write alt text for the art. Do you have any experience or tips in that area?
Oh, that's really great. I think this is a subject where, you need to speak to your subject matter experts to understand what it is that they need to convey with this image. So what I do, and this happens a lot, where I'm writing content for clients that I'm not an expert in. Sometimes I have no idea what it is, right? I used to consult for the Australian Tax Office, right? And I was writing information about superannuation, capital gains tax. I still don't have much of an idea about some of those things, right? So what you do is you take the time to conduct even a workshop with your subject matter expert, and you ask all those technical questions. You know, can you explain this concept to me? So for the painter example is, can you explain, you know, what is the meaning behind these visuals? What are you aiming to convey with them? What does this mean? And again, it's trying to take something that seems really subjective, that a subjective concept like art, and trying to distill it down to make it a little bit more objective as well. So, you know, even conducting some desktop research and looking at competitors, like other competitor websites that have very similar things on, you know, their web pages, and have a look at the alt text that they use as well. Is there a standard? Or, you know, what does the artist or the painter, what is their intent with this, and writing that down. And a great way as well when you're conducting competitor analysis is on your mouse, you can, you know, right click inspect. And in that inspection, it'll come up with, you know, a little code window, and you can see the alt text that has been used. I can add a screenshot in there as well. And I do that a lot too. When I'm inspecting websites or I'm inspecting my own website, you need to ensure that, you know, the hierarchy of information is accurate. So screen readers are accurately reading out the right order and structure of the page. You wouldn't want them to read a button CTL, you know, call to action before they read the first heading of your page, right? There's a logical flow that you want to convey, and you convey that visually, but you also need to convey that for people who are vision impaired as well. I know, sorry, I went on a bit of a tangent, but yeah, I guess to your point is speak with your subject matter experts, connect with them, get an understanding of what they want to convey, and do competitive research to see what other people are doing in that space as well.
I love that. Beautiful copywriters. We need more and more of them. That's my answer to that. Francis, you brought up earlier, and I think David did as well, talking about having people with lived experience in the workforce, how much that adds in particular. And I want to talk a little bit about recruitment. This is an area that certainly government is trying to focus on and encourage corporations to do. Those big corps in Australia are starting to build it. I think that part of the problem is there's they want to do it, but they don't know how to do it. What things do you have to have ready and prepared if you want to recruit for people with disabilities?
I think this is a really critical area for people to consider recruiting people with disability. I think to start with, the workplace needs to be accessible and inclusive to enable, the business or the organisation to recruit and retain employees with a disability, and for this to be a positive experience for both the business or the organisation and the employees with disability. I think it's really important in order to create an inclusive culture, to provide disability awareness and confidence training to all employees and volunteers, including managers and people leaders. I think it's also important to have an accessibility assessment undertaken of the workplace, and as I was saying before, with more than just a physical lens to that. I think it's also important to develop a disability action inclusion plan, and not just as a ticker box exercise that it can be at times, but that it is a pathway to becoming that being an inclusive employer. So I think as David was talking about before, the ideal process for developing a DAPE is to include all staff and who may not have disclosed that they have a disability and still might not do that in the process of developing a DAPE, but will share insights that come from their lived experience. There's a lot of rich knowledge and experience about not only what maybe that organisation does well, but how they could improve, because they have an understanding already of the business and the organisation and what could be done better. So I think there's a lot of opportunities out there to employ people with disability, and a lot of benefits about why you would do that. People with disability have a lot of diverse perspectives, experience, skills, and talents. I think that there's evidence out there that that employing people with disability can boost productivity and morale in the workplace. People with disability have very good problem-solving skills, and they have regular experience adapting to challenges and finding creative solutions. So hiring people with disability can support businesses to find innovative solutions to challenging problems and create new and more efficient processes. And I think, by employing people with disability as well, I think a business or an organisation then reflects a business's surrounding community and customer base, and therefore, better understanding of their customers and their clients, and that also leads to enhancing the business's image and brand amongst its staff, community, and resources.
There are so many great opportunities, which you've just listed so well, Frances. Are there challenges too to be prepared for?
Did you want me to speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. David, I'll get to you. Don't worry. I know I can see you're chomping at the bit to answer, but I'll get to you, I promise.
There definitely are challenges. I think even people go straight into the space of advertising a job without thinking about getting the workplace ready in the way that I described just prior. But even when you're thinking about developing job advertisements and participation and position descriptions, the accessibility and inclusiveness of the potential employer needs to be demonstrated. So,
341 Waltham Road.
Sorry, somebody asking a question?
No, I think Jock's just accidentally unmuted himself.
No worries. So I would really encourage that when people are putting job advertisements together, that they include in that, to request reasonable adjustments if required to assist the applicants through the application and recruitment process. And also in the job advertisements, not including non-essential requirements in the position description. So often it's listed as driver's license is required when it's not required at all. Also, I think indicating a willingness to customize the role for the right candidate. I think people with disabilities often face barriers at work because some of the features of the work situation could be readily altered. So making those workplace adjustments for employees with disabilities is important, and the Commonwealth have the Employee Assistance Fund. Reasonable adjustments aren't required for all people with disability, but they can include, for instance, additional time for an interview or any tasks associated with recruitment, because you need to give people a fair chance to demonstrate their best selves. I myself aren't the best in interviews, but I know I can do the job. So I think everyone needs that opportunity. I think an alternative approach to completing online assessments for interviews too, because the online system is not necessarily accessible. And the provision of accessibility supports such as live captioning and Auslan interpreters or a support person in that process.
Amazing. Thanks, Frances. David, your turn. What are your top tips for being prepared for hiring and being, well, inclusively hiring?
Yeah, and building off everything Frances just said there, but I think the critical point which Frances made is looking at this from an ability and, I would say from a competitive advantage perspective. So starting off with the right mindset. And it's often when we're talking to other organisations, larger organisations looking to employ people with a disability or people with neurodiverse conditions, know immediately if you're talking to somebody in the corporate social responsibility arm of the organization, nothing against CSR people, but it is the wrong place to start. It is the wrong place to be having the discussion. It has to be led from senior executives, from people in culture that actually understand what the advantage is and why they're doing that, not from a sort of social responsibility perspective. So I'd kind of make that point to begin with. Then I think, yeah, a lot of the focus at the moment is still very much on that recruitment side, as opposed to kind of what's the ongoing support needed in the workplace and making sure that employees are being then properly included for all the reasons why you hired them in the first place, making sure they're included. There are some things though to focus on from a recruitment perspective. And some of these things might sound like very simple tips, but a lot of organizations don't do it. So as Francis said, kind of, how can you rely more on kind of assessments and tasks that often people could complete in their own time to help inform whether you think they would be good at a particular role. The other one, which is becoming increasingly common, and I love it, is just provide the interview questions in advance. So if you're going along to a face-to-face interview, it's already confronting enough for so many people to go to an interview. Give the questions 24, 48 hours before. The interview is not, who's the biggest smartass that can come up with the best answer at that particular second. It's kind of, you're just trying to understand the person. So why don't you do basic things like that? So looking for some modifications during the recruitment process. Then I think ongoing, as Francis has said, kind of thinking about what workplace adjustments might be needed, and certainly thinking beyond the physical disability into the hidden disabilities and neurodiverse and others. So having the workplace suitable from a physical perspective, but also thinking about those sensory zones, thinking about what support employees might need over the longer term. So often somebody started really well, and then they've started to go downhill and they're experiencing burnout. What kind of support might that person have needed in the workplace? So kind of thinking through that from the beginning. We've talked about the inclusion aspect. The other one, which I think all organizations are still struggling with now, is the hybrid work environment. And in some senses, people said, this is amazing. This is fantastic for people with a disability, for people who might be anxious in going to a workplace, for people with a range of conditions. And yes, probably it has been an amazing opportunity for people, at least for our organization. We see hybrid working as really important. So we see it, yes, people can work from home, but they need that balance of coming into an office location as well. And so that's equally important for somebody with a disability, as all of our staff. So kind of not to make that mistake of saying, well, people can work remotely, so we've avoided some of the need for these adjustments, or this person might be more comfortable, in quotes, kind of working remotely. But it is really important from an inclusion perspective, from a sense of belonging, for their ability to work with other team members, to still keep thinking through those things. So I guess that's the biggest point I'd make in our new ways of working. Is not, I mean, for some organizations, fully remote may be an option, but for our organization, that's something we spend a lot of time thinking about.
I think it's a really good point. And we talk a lot in the tech space about flexibility to different types of devices. And one of the things I often say about accessibility is that we're not just being flexible to different types of devices, we're being flexible to different types of people. And we're all different, and providing that flexibility. Certainly, I've actually been working remotely since 2013, and entirely remotely. I have certain clients I go in to see, but we haven't sort of had a set office or a day I have to go in, and that's enabled me to be actually the best employee I can possibly be for my company, and has been a really important part of why I've stayed, to be perfectly honest, because it provides me that flexibility to do the other things I want to do, mostly be a taxi driver to my kids. But outside of that, it has provided me the flexibility. Not only do I love the work that I do, but a lot of flexibility. I want to pick up, David, you talked a lot about sort of, it's one thing to have the hiring process. Yes, get people in. It's another thing to keep those people in and productive and happy in their role. and confident to be able to continue doing their job. And there are lots of challenges in this space, even in the government space, I dare say, Liz, with intranets and documentation. Where do you see, Liz, where are the improvements to be made, and where are we already doing it well, do you think?
Sorry, my internet is a little dodgy. I missed the first part of that question. Could you just repeat it?
Yeah, so David brought up the fact that it's one thing to hire people. It's another thing to keep people on happy, content, confident to be able to continue doing their job. So that support throughout once you've hired inclusively with people with lived experience. Where do you think we're doing that really well? And where are we not doing that so well? Where are the challenges that we need to maybe pull up our socks a bit?
Yeah, for sure. And I can see that there's sometimes people see it as a box tick, and that's the wrong intention to have. Be really genuine and think about, why does inclusivity matter to you? And, the big thing that, both Francis and David were talking about is people offer different perspectives. Everyone has a different lived experience. And it's so amazing when you have different types of people writing content. They have a different, lived experience in the back of their head, and they might bring a different perspective to the workshop that we might not have considered. So sometimes instead of conducting a lot of extensive research as well, if people don't have time and budget, if you have a diverse workforce, all of a sudden you have a lot of different voices in the room, which is really helpful for creating inclusive products. And in terms of documentation and, different intranets as well, government, we become really unwieldy with the amount of information that we have behind the scenes, right? And it's about providing the same experience that we do to our customers for our employees as well. And that's the thing people forget. It's like, oh, you're already, within the organization. We don't need to make things inclusive for you. We don't need to make information easy to find. Just go and find it. It's there. It's somewhere in the internet, right? And so what we see is that all of a sudden we have really large intranets within our organization. And that makes things really hard for internal employees to find. So if they can't find, people and culture documentation, or, easy to access career development support, or we also have EAP programs in government as well. So EAP is employee assistance programs. So if you need a little extra help, you need to talk to someone outside of your team, then there are those support networks as well. So it's thinking about what's the support you have within your team and how accessible is that support. Don't hide it. Don't bury it within the intranet as well. And in terms of that structure at work, having, managers that are trained within leadership as well and really know how to actively listen to their employees too is super important to understand, okay, how can we better address your needs, and needs change and evolve during time as well. So ensuring that they're actively engaging with employees, and then having other support structures as well. So yeah, the employee assistance programs are important, and also just mentors outside of your team, because people might not always feel super comfortable to talk to their manager when, it's about something that their manager has asked them to do and maybe they're not achieving that. And they might feel like, I don't want to talk to my manager about this because I'm on the hook for this. Maybe they think I can't do the job. So who are those communities that are there that you can go and talk to or even vent to, that are really healthy and safe networks as well? So yeah, I would say it's information for employees that's easy and accessible to find. Treat your employees the same way you do as your customers, and build up support networks within your organization so people have many different groups and communities and individuals they can connect with that's outside of just their general manager.
Awesome. I think this is going to be my last question. And Francis, I'm going to ask you about it because I think that we know that GetAboutAble, everyone has a lived experience or has experience with someone close in their family with lived experience. What's an example of feedback at GetAboutAble where your GetAboutAble is engaging the employee to ensure around that inclusivity, that support going to do their job?
So the feedback, sorry, just so that I can understand that, Amanda.
How does GetAboutAble put that process in place so that feedback can come from the employees?
Yes.
Can you give us an example of how that works at GetAboutAble?
Well, once again, no offense to government, but I have come from 10 years of working in the NDIS space, in a NDIS partner in the community. So pretty much you're not a public servant, but you are, and you do work for a non-government organisation. So I was 10 years in Victoria working for a provider. And I think, I'd had my fill, and this position was available at GetAboutAble, and jumped at the chance. And I'm getting to your question, but basically they get what collaboration is. They get the understanding for the flexibility for people who have lived experience of disability to essentially be the best they can. They're recruited based on skills, and they have a flexibility to undertake the tasks required for us all to come together and get that work done. So we have a very open communication way of working, and we do have the opportunity for people to input to make the best decisions around the work that we do. That said, not everyone's involved in those decisions, otherwise the work wouldn't get done. But I think it's really recruiting around skills, and it is being open to that customization, and offering a flexibility that enables the people to get the work done, and not requiring it to be in a tight box, really.
Amazing. But if everyone else in this room is anything like me, you have a page full of notes of things that people have said that I am going to, what an amazing discussion. This happens frequently with me. I feel like we could stay on for another hour and a half, but we all have other things to be doing in our workday. So I think we'll hand over to Bree to do some closing. But firstly, I want to say thank you to all three of you. What an incredible discussion. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope that you have as well. Thank you for sharing all of your knowledge and your experience and your expertise. It's much appreciated. I know the community at OZeWAI appreciates being able to get experts like yourselves in. So thank you very much. I will hand off to Bree to do a few closing remarks.
Look, thank you again, Amanda, for moderating so well. You've really captured the questions asked and the discussions, and really got it rolling again. And thank you to all these panelists. Oh, it's been wonderful. It's been great to connect again, get these tips and tricks. So for OZeWAI, please subscribe to our mailing list. Consider joining. It helps support us in these kind of events, and also in the in-person events to get us to things like GetAboutAble as well, where we're actually setting up an accessibility experience lab at GetAboutAble. We're excited about that. A lot of the people that are attending there can come and talk to us about digital accessibility. We also are working with the Future Skills organisation. They've put out a discussion paper about the digital accessibility gaps in education and training. They're looking at where that needs to be fixed. We're running a workshop on the 2nd of September. So please, share on your network, join. They're looking to discuss the barriers in training and education around digital accessibility, and how they can change that, and advise the government in how to change it as well. So join that, and visit the OZeWAI website. We have a lot of information up there. Thank you. Ricky's on the call. He does a lot of work on the website. And thank you everyone for being here. And we look forward to our next session at the end of September, where we talk about design. Sorry, not design, training and courses. That's right. We're going to talk about training. It'll be a great one to discuss. Thanks, everyone.
Amazing. Thank you.